Murmansk. In the wartime, this northern city became one of the most important ports which were used to deliver cargoes and ammunition from the Allied States, Great Britain, and the United States. In addition, the Northern Fleet was based in Murmansk. The city was at constant threat of being captured by the German forces throughout the war. Its defense required strenuous efforts of the Red Army. The route to the beleaguered city was no less difficult for the escorted convoys, which were special units consisting of transport ships and escort vessels. The seamen of the Merchant Marine and the Navy, as well as the aviators, took every effort to let the convoys reach the destination port. A large battle broke out in the vast expanses of the Norwegian and Barents Sea for the vital cargoes to be delivered in the Soviet Union. The battle was mainly fought by the sailors and aviators of the Soviet Northern Fleet and allies of the anti-German coalition. Viktor Taman, Grigory Shchedrin, Mikhail Borisov, and others in the Northern Fleet of the Liberator series. Lend-Lease was the program under which the United States of America supplied the Allied nations with equipment during the period of World War II. The supplies included armament, industrial equipment, commercial ships, motor vehicles, food, fuel, and medicines. Support was provided to the governments of 42 countries. A total of over $50 billion worth of supplies were shipped by the United States to the Allied nations. Deliveries to Great Britain amounted to $31 billion. The Soviet Union received shipments for $11.3 billion, equivalent to over $150 billion at today's prices. The USSR was indebted for more than $700 million for the supplied materials. The agreements signed by the United States and the USSR in the wartime had been reviewed for many years and were settled as late as in 1972. Anastas Mikoyan, chairman of the Committee for Food and Clothing Supply of the Red Army. In autumn 1941, we lost everything, and if it had not been for the Lend-Lease, armament, food, warm clothing for the Army and other supplies, it would have remained to be seen what the results would have been. The importance of the Lend-Lease started to be slowly reduced when the evacuated plants were relocated to the east of the Urals and put into operation. But every 6th fighter aircraft and every 5th bomber was still delivered under the Lend-Lease. That was even more true for the radar and hydroacoustic equipment that was not massively produced in the Soviet Union. According to the Soviet veterans, motor transportation was mostly carried out at the front by the American vehicles. The well-known Katyushas had been installed on the Studebaker trucks since 1942. As Alexander Zuyev recollects, the Studebaker is an off-road vehicle. Both front and rear axles are the driving one. And what about the ZIS? You start to drive and the engine dies. They were too weak. Food supplies were not less important than equipment. Tinned foods delivered under the Lend-Lease were jokingly called the Second Front, since the Soviet soldiers expected from the Allies not only economic aid, but also active warfare against the fascists in Europe. As Yuri Koryakin recollects, tinned meat was mostly from the U.S. It was very good. A big can with the pork fat inside, which might be spread on bread, and a fist-size meat portion in the center, so we were not hungry. As Marshal Zhukov recollects, the Americans delivered us a lot of materials without which we would not have been able to build up our reserves and to continue the war. We were provided with 350,000 motor vehicles, and those were the vehicles. The Americans really helped us out with the gunpowder and explosives. Would we be able to promptly set up production of tanks if it had not been for the American steel deliveries? The Soviet Union received motor vehicles and their components from 26 American, Canadian, and British companies. In addition, a lot of ships were delivered. The cargoes were transported from the United States and the United Kingdom by three main routes. From the United States and Canada across the Pacific Ocean to the ports of Vladivostok and Nakhatka, from New York to the Iranian shores, through the Cape of Good Hope to the Persian Gulf, and further by vehicle or by train to Baku, and finally in the northern direction from the ports located in Iceland and Scotland to Arkhangelsk and Murmansk. The first Arctic convoy named Dervish safely reached Arkhangelsk on August 31, 1941. The convoy consisted of only 6 English merchant ships and 1 Soviet vessel escorted by destroyers and 7 minesweepers. Friendly relations between the Soviet Union and Great Britain were embodied in trucks, boxes with mines, bombs, rubber, and wool. The Hurricane British fighter aircraft was also delivered in a knockdown condition. The convoy route to the northern USSR ports stretched along the Norwegian shore occupied by the Germans. Several more convoys had traveled safe before the end of 1941. However, starting from the spring of 1942, the German command realized the importance of the northern convoys to the USSR and took strong actions. The ports of northern Norway were packed with around 120 German combat ships, including 3 battleships headed by the giant Tirpitz, 2 heavy cruisers and a mine layer, around 20 destroyers, 3 minesweeper flotillas, and 3 escort and anti-submarine warfare flotillas. There were 30 submarines as well. In addition, by mid-spring, more than 300 bomber aircraft and most of Luftwaffe torpedo aircraft were located on the Norwegian airfields. A well-planned, bloody war was initiated against the Allies' convoys. Under these conditions, the Soviet, American, and British sailors and aviators had to protect the Arctic convoys against the German Navy and Air Forces. Certainly there were some losses. For example, when the PQ-8 convoy was passing the Kola Peninsula, the German submarine took down a destroyer. The situation became critical by summer 1942. Between 1941 and 1943, the convoys had been assembled in the British ports named Loch Ewe and Scapa Flow, and in Reykjavik, Iceland. At first, a convoy contained only 6 to 10 carrier ships. Starting from March 1942, their number increased to 40 carriers. 3 methods of vessel escorting were applied: close or direct escort. Several destroyers, corvettes, and minesweepers were running close to the carrier ships, protecting them against the German submarines and aircraft. Since early 1943, an anti-submarine aircraft carrier had been included in the escort group. Medium escort was provided by a small group of 2 to 4 cruisers running at the distance of 30 to 40 miles away from the vessel convoy. It was mainly aimed at dealing with attacks by enemy surface craft. Distant escort was operated at the distance of 150 to 300 miles away from the convoy and consisted of 1 battleship, 2 or 3 cruisers, and 3 to 5 destroyers. Its mission was to intercept the heavy enemy vessels. Sailing to the Soviet shores, the foreign seamen were aware of the high risk associated with the voyage and ready for all emergencies. But it happened for some of them to lose their nerves at the supreme moment. As Lawrence Downey, a seaman of Allies' merchant fleet, recollects, a small launch came alongside with the captain, who was returning from the Commodore's meeting. As the captain climbed aboard, the 2 Scotsmen jumped onto the launch as it pulled away. Obviously, the stories of the fate of many ships on the Russian run had scared them to the point of desertion. The PQ-17 convoy sailing from Murmansk had the most tragic fate. The convoy, consisting of 35 carrier ships, including 2 Soviet tanker ships named Azerbaijan and Donbass, sailed eastbound from Iceland on June 27, 1942. They were covered by 6 destroyers, 4 anti-submarine trawler ships, 4 corvettes, 3 minesweepers, 2 anti-aircraft auxiliaries, 2 submarines, 3 rescue vessels, and a tanker ship. Convoy PQ-17 was carrying the cargo with the total value of around $700 million at the prices for 1942, including almost 300 aircraft, 600 tanks, 3,000 trucks, as well as aviation fuel and other materials. It was the largest convoy of all those previously sent. The convoy was running at the distance of around 300 miles from the Norwegian coast at the speed of not more than 10 knots per hour. Navigating conditions in northern latitudes were always known for their complexities. The storms were raging in the non-freezing water areas in autumn and winter seasons. The wave height was up to 5 meters, and the ambient temperature was sometimes as low as minus 30 degrees with strong and stormy wind. The waves were heavily crashing into a shipboard. The water was flowing all over the decks of fully loaded ships sitting deep into the water, as Lawrence Downey recollects. Such rough weather made it more difficult for the U-boats to get an accurate line on a potential target. This at least was encouraging. The convoy ships had to run at a very slow speed of 7 knots or less. For example, around 13 kilometers per hour in the storm conditions. However, the sea weather was quick to get worse or better in the summertime. As soon as the sky became clear, the German reconnaissance aircraft appeared chasing the convoy ships. On July 1st, the German aircraft detected the convoy in the Norwegian Sea. And since then, there had been no break in observation. 4 days after the convoy had been detected by the Germans, it was attacked by 25 torpedo bombers at once. They were new Heinkel 177. They were strafing on the ships all at once. The Germans used the technique of air strike by wave, which means that all bombers and torpedo carriers were dive bombing simultaneously. The enemy aircraft faced counter fire of the anti-aircraft guns installed aboard the ships. A severe and heavy fighting commenced. The gunners were desperately rotating the hand wheels of their Oerlikon cannons. The magazine case of 20mm gun contains 60 shells of tracer, armor, piercing, and explosive types. It featured the fire rate of 450 rounds per minute. A spare magazine was placed nearby and emptied within 3.5 seconds. There were a lot of female gunners on 2 Russian tankers. As Paul Lund, a seaman of PQ-17 escort ship, recollects, "We were astonished at the number of women aboard 2 big Russian tankers, Azerbaijan and Donbass. Almost all Russian ships had women on the crew. The torpedo carriers were flying just above the water surface, sliding between the boards of ships. The tanks brought their guns into action from aboard. They were supposed to be used in the warfare by the Soviet Union, but had to be put into action still in the sea. The aircraft flying almost at the level of navigating bridges were shot even with the signal flares, which could only scare the novice pilots, but were unable to inflict any harm on the aircraft." Torpedoes were dropped on the ships. There was a thundering explosion. One convoy vessel was hit by 3 torpedoes at the same time. When they used up all the weapons load, the German aircraft were gone. The convoy lost several vessels in this intensive air attack. However, the remaining ships drew up again to resume their voyage. Withstanding the attacks of the German torpedo carriers, bombers, and submarines, convoy PQ-17 successfully passed the most dangerous portions of its route. However, on July 4th, First Sea Lord Dudley Pound was informed of Tirpitz' battleship driven out to sea and decided as follows. Close escort destroyers and other vessels were to sail westwards to join the distant escort unit. The carrier ships had to divide into separate groups and proceed to the Soviet ports on their own. It appeared later that the information about Tirpitz's involvement was false, but the escort vessels were already gone. Left without any support, the merchant ships resumed sailing on their own, facing the German aircraft, submarines, and cruisers. Enjoying their benefits, the German submarines did not even waste their torpedoes. They freely rose to the surface and fired their guns at the ships. We broke the surface and brought our guns into play. The seamen had a lot of fun peppering the enemy with 88mm shells. Olopatra turned into a heap of burning rubbish. Finding themselves hundreds of miles away from the Soviet shores, but close to the enemy airfields and Navy base, the carrier ships were, one by one, fighting a losing battle. The ships were on fire. 23 of them had been sunk. Around 200 sailors were killed, but 1,500 seamen were rescued. Many were frostbitten. The summer of 1942 was very difficult for the Soviet Union. Rostov-on-Don was occupied. The Germans reached the Volga River and gained access to the Caucasus. The numerous military cargo loss came as a heavy blow for the Soviet war-sustaining resources. The worst thing was that the next convoy was delayed till September. Although with heavily armed escort, convoy PQ-18 lost 13 vessels. As a result, the Allies had to stop running convoys until the polar night came. Performance of the Norway-German forces located in the polar region and operating in the off-road conditions of northern Norway was highly dependent on the sea deliveries. The shipping routes in the north were even more important to Nazi Germany because they were used to carry out high-value strategic raw materials, such as nickel ore from Petsamo and iron ore from Kirkenes. The iron ore supplied from Norway covered 2/3 of the Reich's needs in this strategic raw material, as opposed to the Allies' convoys sailing to Arkhangelsk and Murmansk. The German shipping routes were stretching along the coast. The German watch posts and artillery batteries were located on the shore, and minefields were provided along the routes to protect the German ships. The Soviet Northern Fleet took every effort to disturb the sailing of the enemy along the Norwegian coast. Starting from late July 1941, the Germans had to provide their vessels with escort. Moreover, the German Navy had to allocate patrol ships for naval bases and ports, and to strengthen its anti-submarine warfare. Both parties were building up their military forces and suffering losses in their struggle for communications. In 1941, the Northern Fleet included 15 submarines, but their number increased to 23 by 1944. Each submarine required approximately 1 month training period. The maintenance personnel carried out the repair work, while the crew members underwent the combat training and performed the training missions. Being out at sea, a submarine remains at the water surface most of the time. When operating, its diesel motors serve not only to ensure its run, but also to charge its batteries. To submerge, ballast tanks of the submarine are filled with water. To emerge, the ballast is blown out. In other words, compressed air is supplied to force water out of the tanks. As a result, the submarine goes up. When submerged, the submarine is under steering control. During the cruise, the need to submerge can occur at any moment. That's why, while staying in the port, the commander could replace the morning physical exercises of the submarine crew members with a crash dive training. The time taken by the crew to get inside the submarine was registered by a stopwatch. When a crash dive was performed in the combat environment, all the crew members were rushing to the nose compartment to form the correct pitch angle of the submarine, known as trim. This made the submarine pitch up and increase its diving speed. When the submarine remained at the base, the sailors cleaned off any fuel spills with brushes, caustic soda, and salt, approaching any out-of-reach spots in the compartments. Unless it was done, the fuel spots on the sea surface would disclose the submarine's position to the enemy Navy and Air Forces. The naval officers considered the navigation environment, currents, data on the sea mine obstacles, and worked out cooperation plans. The area of operation of the Soviet submarines covered 400 miles westwards from the Rybachi Peninsula along the Norwegian coast. On the contrary, the Nazis' convoy ran close to the shore. To approach their routes, the submarines had to cross the minefields stretching along the Norwegian coast. When a submarine leaves the port, the crew members are aware that there will be a month-long patrolling along an assigned sector. The Soviet submarines are extra careful approaching the minefield. The German UMB anti-submarine mines were equipped with contact fuses. The mines were connected with the anchors by a mine mooring cable. It was enclosed in an 18-meter-long hose. If a submarine got into contact with the cable, the twisted hose activated the firing mechanism, leading to a mine explosion. In addition, the mine fuses were connected with an antenna rising to the sea surface. Coming into contact with the antenna resulted in an explosion as well. To cross the minefield safely over the surface was only possible at full sea. However, the skilled commanders preferred to force the minefields at a maximum depth. Mine explosion is less dangerous when located over the submarine than under it, since the blast wave tends to spread in the direction of least resistance, which is up to the sea surface. Victor Taman, commander of submarine L-20. I finished my cigarette and put the stub into the can buried in my sleeve pocket. Stubs, matches, and other wastes had never been thrown overboard, so that the enemy could have no idea about the submarine presence. I'm taking a look at the shadowy islands that we're heading for, at the desolate sea stretching in the shade of night, and I'm walking down the ladder. The submarine dives and starts to feel its way. The electric motors are running. It is not allowed to open the bulkhead doors without the watch officer's permission. If one of the compartments is damaged, this measure will prevent the water penetrating inside the submarine. The crew members are at the assigned positions in a red alert state. All the seamen are carefully listening to the noise overhead, as Grigory Shchedrin, commander of submarine S-56, recollects. Everybody's waiting for the rustling sound of mine cable rubbing against the board. Mine cable is a steel wire connecting the mine with its anchor. When someone moves unexpectedly, the butterflies begin to buzz around in the stomach. And now the minefield has been crossed. The submarine reaches the enemy communications. The soundman reports. Center, I can hear the propeller noise from above, supposedly a convoy. The submarine ascends to the periscope depth. A torpedo attack is announced. A convoy can be seen through the periscope, consisting of 3 German carriers, a torpedo boat, and 3 escort vessels. The chief mate and navigator help the commander to identify the heading and speed of the target, which is the largest carrier. The commander waits till the periscope crosses in line with the vessel stem. A command is given. Weapons ready. Fire. There are 2 light impacts. Torpedoes are pushed out of the submarine by compressed air. The air pressure on board is going up, with each torpedo being pushed out. The pressure bumps hurt the eardrums of the crew members. The crew remains motionless. The commander is looking at the stopwatch measuring the distance covered by the torpedo. An explosion is heard. It was a strike. The enemy carrier sinking, but the German escort ships start to chase the submarine. The submarine soundman informs the commander about the propeller noise of the German escort vessel coming closer. The enemy torpedo boats, destroyers, and escort vessels launch their torpedoes. The sound of their explosions is heard outboard. The signal lamps are flashing. The cork filler is falling down from the walls of submarine compartments. The torpedo series are delivered now closer, now further away. The submarine dives to the depth of 70 meters. The deeper it descends, the higher pressure is applied by water on its body, and the more destructive is each explosion. In addition, the damaged body prevents pumps from pumping out the water efficiently. Their performance gets worse as the submarine has to work against the outside water pressure. On the other hand, the aiming accuracy decreases with increasing depth. The deeper the submarine descends, the more difficult for the German soundmen to identify its position. The propeller noise, which is used by the enemy to detect the submarine position, becomes distorted after passing the water layers of various densities and leads to misinterpretation of its position. What is more, if the seal of the fuel tanks are damaged as a result of bombing and the solar oil leaks outboard, the oil trace will fall far behind on the water surface and will not disclose the submarine position. On the contrary, the shallow depth will lead to fast detection in these circumstances. The perfect silence is kept inside the submarine. One can talk only in whispers, as any sound is transmitted in the water for long distances. Soon, it gets difficult to breathe. It's not allowed to activate the air cleaning system to remove carbon dioxide, since its blowers emit high noise levels, which will disclose the submarine position. 2 hours after submersion, a match will not light inside the submarine. It will die out at once. The content of carbon dioxide increases roughly by 1% per hour in all compartments. Moreover, it is necessary to save the packaged air. It is required to blow out the ballast tanks to let the submarine emerge. Soon, the crew members start to experience dyspnea. Then comes dizziness along with tinnitus. The shortness of breath turns into agony. Hands are wet and cold. It's hard to move. The blood pressure is increased. If the carbon dioxide content of blood rises up to 6%, a person becomes incapable of managing his or her own performance. Fortunately, the explosion noise is dying away. The soundman reports to the commander that the propellers of the enemy vessels cannot be heard anymore. The pursuers are left behind. Now it is time to ascend to periscope depth and have a look around. The horizon is clear. The commander orders to get ready to emerge. The submarine appears on the surface. The hatch is opened. The diesel motors are running. The submarine compartments are vented with fresh air. The commander allows the crew to go out to the bridge. The seamen go out by threes to breathe some fresh air or have a cigarette. In the war years, the submariners of the Northern Fleet performed 259 torpedo attacks and 14 artillery attacks on the enemy ships. The mine barriers arranged by the Soviet submarines blew up and sank 8 carrier ships, 2 escort vessels, and 2 submarine chasers. In total, the submarines of the Soviet Navy brought down 328 carriers, 70 combat ships, and 14 auxiliary vessels, with the total craft displacement of 938,000 tons. Motor torpedo boats are a high-speed, small-sized combat ship. Its main weapons are torpedoes. During the wartime, the Soviet Union mostly used Gant-5 hydroplaning boats and D-3 boats. According to their functions, they perfectly complemented each other. Small-sized G5 class boats had an aluminum hull made of riveted plates. These boats were mainly aimed at performing torpedo attacks in the coastal area and in poor visibility conditions. The D-3 class boats, featuring improved seagoing ability, were able to operate in the remote areas at the distance of 350. The D-3 body structure was made of wood and ensured its high reliability with 3-layered bottom and double-layered wooden deck and boards. Outer layer was made of lark wood, which was very light and decay-resistant. 4 watertight bulkheads divided the inner space into 5 compartments to make the boat hard to sink. The boat was equipped with 2 side torpedo launchers capable of torpedo attacks, even in case of drive loss. The boat was equipped with a 25mm automatic cannon and twin-barreled large-caliber Colt machine guns supplied under the Lend-Lease to provide anti-aircraft protection. The D-3 was a good high-speed and hard-to-sink torpedo boat. The Soviet motor torpedo boats had been used for various purposes during the wartime. They were employed in dealing with the submarines, protecting the carrier ships, and arranging the minefields. The boats were involved in the landing of troops and raiding forces. They were also assigned with the ship-to-shore bombing missions. However, their primary purpose was to disrupt maritime shipping. Various tactical options were used for this purpose. One of the options was the so-called free hunting. It was very efficient in the first year of the war when the motor torpedo boats, lacking radars, had received no air raid support. The boats sailed for their missions in certain areas one by one or in groups of 3 or 4 boats. The boats sailed for their missions in certain areas one by one or in groups of 3 or 4 boats. When they met the enemy vessels, they commenced an attack. However, the free hunting option had a substantial drawback as well. Sailing far away at sea, the boats had to take aboard not only torpedoes, but also extra fuel load. It deprived the boats both of freedom of maneuvering and half of the combat capabilities. That's why the crews of motor torpedo boats preferred the ambush tactics when they were waiting for the enemy convoy ships in the most likely area of their occurrence. The naval aircraft of the Northern Fleet was actively involved in the attacks on the enemy convoys. Flying from morning till night, individual reconnaissance airplanes were searching for the enemy vessels and combat ships sailing at sea. If they managed to detect a German convoy, the planes would follow it in shifts and put the strike aircraft on its track. Data on location of the convoy, the number and type of ships, and its heading were transmitted by radio to the air staff of the Northern Fleet. The air staff identified the forces to be used to deliver an attack. The Soviet torpedo bombers and skip bombers were made ready for takeoff. By 1944, the A-20G Boston became the main aircraft of the Soviet mine and torpedo aviation. The American bomber A-20G Boston became the most produced version of the Douglas A-20 family. A large part of these bombers was supplied to the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease. The aircraft was driven by two Wright Cyclone engines of combined 1,600 horsepower. The maximum capacity of two adjacent bomb bays was 1,800 kilograms. Even flying with only one working motor was not an extraordinary task for the pilot. The Boston was a very robust vehicle. As Alexei Yurinov, a Lend-Lease ferry pilot, recollects, it was a fairly good vehicle with two reliable engines driving it at the speed of over 500 kilometers per hour, so that there was no problem with shaking off the Messerschmitt in descent. The aircrew consisted of a pilot, a navigator, and a radio operator gunner. The Americans designed the A-20G as a ground attack aircraft. The nose portion was equipped with four 20mm M1 cannons and two Colt Browning machine guns of 12.7mm caliber. Subsequent aircraft of this version had no cannons but 6 machine guns in the nose portion. When the A-20G was redesigned to be a torpedo bomber, additional fuel tanks was installed in the bomb bay, which significantly promoted the aircraft range. To provide the aircraft with a torpedo carrying capability, the so-called torpedo bridges were installed in its underbelly area. These bridges contained an I-beam with wooden fairing attached to the fuselage. When flying at short distance, it was possible to load the aircraft with 2 torpedoes at once, but only at hard surface runways. It was difficult for a heavily loaded aircraft to take off and land at the non-paved airfields. Only Wright torpedo was usually used. The torpedoes were sometimes replaced with air mines or large caliber bombs. Mikhail Borisov, hero of the Soviet Union. Just mere 2 torpedoes are an overload. It impairs the air maneuverability, but you have to maneuver after release. A navigator was required for the long-distance flights over water. Navigator's cabin was arranged in the nose section of the aircraft upon removal of machine guns and cannons. The navigator was sometimes placed behind the rear gunner position. The side windows were made by cutting the body, and a small observation dome was installed on top of it. This design limited the navigator's range of vision, but fully maintained the aircraft's firepower. The planes flew in pairs. The first was a leading torpedo bomber, while a skip bomber followed the leader. Prior to takeoff, the navigator checked the bombs and torpedoes. For bombs, delay time was set to 6 seconds. For torpedoes, the settings were the safety release time and depth at which a torpedo would run to the target. The gunner radio operator checked if the machine gun and radio station were working properly. The bombers took off and reached the reference waypoint, where they were joined by the covering fighter aircraft. Pyotr Rosatkin, hero of the Soviet Union. The first overwater flight is scary. What if the motor failed? Where to jump? The further you are flying from the shore, it seems the worse the motor is working. And then the Barents Sea became as safe as home. If you want to shake off the German fighters, just fly to the sea, and nobody will find you there. The naval pilots were wearing the life jackets, which were blown up automatically on the contact with water. If the pilot had to jump out of the crashed aircraft, he had to throw the parachute into clear air prior to water landing, not to be covered by the canopy. As Pyotr Rosatkin recollects, I did throw it off, but earlier than needed, and slapped against the water. I did not black out, just my face swelled up. I took off my boots and headed towards our shore. The rescue kit of the Boston bomber included an air rubber boat designed for 3 people, flares, and food package. When the sky is clear, the line between sky and water is hardly visible, which makes it very hard to fly. Orientation is accomplished only by timekeeping, as Mikhail Borisov recollects. It's easy to come down from the altitude of 50 meters to 30 meters to drop a torpedo, but when moving up, you have to adjust your eyes as it is difficult to determine the altitude. As Noam Kravets recollects, you have to hold a map while keeping the time. You must stick with it, and God forbid you miss any. There's no way to recover the orientation. If the weather is clear and there are no vessels at sea, it seems like you are hanging motionless in the air. You look out and see that the right wind stick is rotating, as well as the left one. But there is only sky and water around, and nothing is changing. As Mikhail Borisov recollects, sometimes we landed at military airfields. The pilots asked, "How do you fly over water with a land-based aircraft? What will you do if a motor fails?" "I'll fly with one motor left. I'll drink a glass of pure alcohol and go ahead." "What if the second motor fails?" "I'll drink the second glass, and after 2 glasses, I'll be half seas over." The covering fighter aircraft are flying at a higher altitude and detect the smoke of the German ships. The bomber aircraft descends to the altitude of 30 meters. The ship bombers come forward to initiate an attack and face the anti-aircraft fire. When skip bombing, the bombs are dropped at the altitude of 15 to 30 meters, 100 meters away from the shipboard. A delayed fused bomb would not go off at once. It would bounce from the water surface and strike against the shipboard. When hit under the waterline, the ship is sure to sink. Maneuvering above the water, the aircraft perform a heading change. The anti-aircraft artillery guns located on the German escort vessels and carriers are firing at them. The large caliber shells are being launched into the water to build up a head of water, being an insurmountable obstacle to the aircraft. The skip bombers are returning fire on the enemy aircraft guns, using their cannons and machine guns. There remains only 200-meter distance to the shipboard. The commander presses the button to release the bombs. If the bombing altitude is higher than needed, the bombs will not bounce from the water surface. They are just sinking, off the target. Now it is the turn of the torpedo bomber. Its task is to drop a torpedo at the speed of around 300 kilometers per hour at the altitude of 30 meters or less. If the altitude is higher, it will influence the torpedo angle to the water surface. If so, the torpedo may dive under the ship and miss the target. To keep the proper heading, speed and flight altitude, and to estimate the speed of a ship, the pilot had to show the highest skills and perfect self-control. A torpedo was dropped roughly at 1 kilometer distance. Having lost almost 1,000 kilos, the aircraft started to gain altitude rapidly, as Mikhail Borisov recollects. At this moment, you have to keep it down to the water. Those who did it remained alive, while those who heaved or gained height were killed. We used to fly so close to the water that the wind sticks were touching the surface. All the German tracers are moving from above. Be careful and do a flat turn. When you are 1,500 to 2,000 meters away, you can move upwards. If you failed to turn around, jumped over the ship, you jumped and kept down again. Explosion. Torpedo hit the ship. For their heroic deeds during the Great Patriotic War, 53 pilots of the Northern Fleet were honored with the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Among them, it is Guard Lieutenant Colonel Boris Foxtistovich Savanov, a fighter pilot to be mentioned. On May 30th, 1942, Boris Savanov, Hero of the Soviet Union, led the fighter aircraft unit to provide air cover of convoy PQ-16, heading for Murmansk. He destroyed 3 Nazi aircraft and was killed in this air battle. In total, he brought down 30 enemy aircraft on his own and 3 more when fighting in a group during the war. On June 14, 1942, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR adopted decree awarding a second Gold Star Medal to Boris Savanov, posthumously. It was the first time when this high title was honored again to the same person. Mikhail Borisov, a pilot, hero of the Soviet Union. I sank 5 carriers. I was awarded 4 orders of the Red Banner, 1 for each ship, and I have no idea whether I received an award for the 5th one or not. There was a belief in our regiment that if you are going for the hero title, you are sure to be crashed. Thus, everybody did all they could to receive anything but the hero title. I was awarded this title on March 6, 1945. Actually, I spent only half a year at the front, but turned out to be Hero of the Soviet Union. The title of the Hero of the Soviet Union was established in 1934. The Gold Star Medal was introduced 5 years later and turned into the highest degree award of the country and a symbol of heroism and courage. The Hero of the Soviet Union was awarded the Order of Lenin, the Gold Star Medal being a special insignia, and a special diploma of the Presidium of the USSR Supreme Soviet. During the war, the title of Hero of the Soviet Union was awarded to 11,635 people. Zoya Kozma-Demienskaya, an 18-year-old Parisian girl, was the first of 87 female heroes of the Soviet Union. Most of the Gold Star holders were fighters in the ground forces, including 1,800 artillerymen, 1,142 tankmen, 650 military engineers, 290 communications men, and 52 home front fighters. The highest title was awarded to 2,400 soldiers of the Air Force. 2 fighter pilots, Ivan Kozhedub and Alexander Pekrishkin, were distinguished with the hero title 3 times, like well-known Marshal Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov. In the Navy, 513 people were honored the hero title. There are 150 heroes of the Soviet Union among the border guards, internal troops, and national security personnel. This title was also given to 234 guerrillas, including Kavpak and Fyodorov, who are famous for being twice decorated with the Gold Star Medal. Officers make up more than half of all the heroes of the Soviet Union. 380 of them are generals, admirals, or marshals. The rest are soldiers and junior commanders. As Pavel Kuleshov, a tankman, recollects, I received the Gold Star and the Hero of Lenin from the hands of Marshal Kanev. Then I was back to my battalion. My fellows managed to get me some sausages, alcohol. They said, take off the star. They put it in hydraulic acid, then wiped it dry and sent it around. Everyone dipped it into his cup. The star made a full round and was back to me. Then we drank it up. That's the way we used to wet the star. The successful actions of the Northern Fleet were one of the main reasons why the enemy's offensive failed in the polar region. The Navy and air escorts provided to secure the merchant ships. The hard work of all the people who lived in Murmansk, Arkhangelsk, Severomorsk, and other northern ports which received important deliveries. All of these activities comprised one of the brightest and the most memorable chapters in the history of the Great Patriotic War.
The importance of the maritime shipments can hardly be exaggerated. The Arctic convoys of the Allied nations delivered roughly 2/3 of all cargoes shipped under the Lend-Lease. Military equipment, vital goods, and food supported the Red Army and the Soviet Union, especially at the first stage of the war, and made their contribution to the German defeat. The Northern Fleet and aviation of the Soviet Union paved the way to the great victory, with their sweat and blood providing the front with the needed resources.